came home 3 days early because my flight got moved up, and I remember thinking how nice it would be to surprise everyone, maybe pick up Thai food on the way, maybe actually sit down for a family dinner for once. What I found instead was my husband laughing so loud I could hear him from the driveway. He never laughs like that with me anymore. I stood in the doorway of my own kitchen and took in the scene. My brother-in-law, his older brother, was at the head of my table, helping himself to what looked like an entire rotisserie chicken. His wife was already halfway through a bottle of wine I'd been saving since our anniversary. Their 2 boys, 8 and 10, were running laps around the living room in their socks, and nobody was telling them to stop. My husband was at the stove flipping pancakes at 9 o'clock at night, like it was a celebration, wearing the apron I'd bought him as a joke 2 Christmases ago. And my daughter, my 7-year-old Lily, was nowhere. I set my bag down. I walked through the kitchen without anyone noticing me. The hallway was dark. I checked her room. Empty. I checked the bathroom. Empty. I felt something cold move through my chest, and I kept walking, all the way to the garage, and that's where I found her. She was sitting on the concrete floor next to my old Honda, her back against the tire, holding the stuffed rabbit she's had since she was 2. The one she calls Bun. She was wearing her school clothes still, the same clothes she'd had on when I left Monday morning. No coat. The garage was maybe 50 degrees. She looked up at me and said, "Mummy." Just that. One word. And then she started crying. I don't remember walking back into that kitchen. I remember being in it, and I remember my voice being very quiet, which is apparently scarier than yelling because my husband turned around from the stove like he touched something hot. "Where has she been?" I asked. "She was being difficult," he said. She kept interrupting. I looked at my brother-in-law. He was still eating. His wife refilled her glass. I said, "I need everyone who doesn't live here to leave. Now. My name is June. I'm 31 years old and I'm a nurse practitioner at a regional hospital about 40 minutes outside of Columbus, Ohio. I work 3 12-hour shifts a week, sometimes 4 when we're short-staffed, which is most of the time lately. I have a daughter named Lily from my first marriage, a marriage that ended when Lily was 18 months old and her father decided he wanted a different life. I don't say that with bitterness anymore. I say it because it's context. I met my husband, who I'll call my husband because I can't bring myself to use his name right now, about 4 years ago. He was charming and funny, and he was so good with Lily at first. I mean genuinely good, down on the floor playing with her, reading to her, doing the voices. I thought I had found something real. We got married 2 years ago. Small ceremony, just family and close friends. My mum flew in from Phoenix. My best friend did my hair. Lily was the flower girl and she took it so seriously, practiced her walk for a week, clutched those petals like they were gold. What I didn't fully understand at the time was how much my husband's family operated as a unit and what that meant for us specifically. His brother and sister-in-law had been going through financial trouble for a few years. His brother had been laid off. They'd burned through savings. They had debts I didn't fully know the scope of. My husband started mentioning them more. Could they come for a long weekend? Could we help with the car payment just this once? Could they stay with us for a couple weeks while they figured out their housing situation? I said yes to the weekends. I said yes to the car payment once. I said yes to the car payment once. I said no to the housing, and that became the first real fight my husband and I ever had. He said I was cold. He said family was family. He said I didn't understand what it meant to be there for people. I said I had a daughter and a mortgage, and I was working 50 hours a week, and I needed our home to be our home. We compromised. They would visit more. We would help where we could. I told myself it was fine. It wasn't fine. Over the next year, the visits got longer. A weekend became a week. A week became 2. My brother-in-law treated our house like a hotel, left dishes in the sink, borrowed my car without asking, let his boys destroy the playroom Lily and I had spent a whole Saturday organising. His wife complained about everything quietly and smiled to my face, and I could feel her judgment like a pressure change in the room. And through all of it, I kept watching how my husband acted around them versus how he acted around them. With them, he was loose and warm and generous. With me, he was distracted. With Lily, he was... I want to be careful how I say this. He was not unkind, but he was absent in a way that grew over time. He forgot her parent-teacher conference. He forgot to pick her up from gymnastics twice. Once I came home to find she'd eaten cereal for dinner because he'd ordered pizza with his brother and hadn't thought to get her anything. She said she wasn't hungry, he told me. She was 7. She will always say she's not hungry if she thinks she's bothering someone. I started paying closer attention to our finances around month 14 of the marriage. I'm embarrassed it took me that long, but I want to be honest. I trusted him. We had a joint account I deposited into from every paycheck, and I assumed he was managing it the way we'd agreed. I was handling my student loans separately, my car payment, my credit cards. The joint account was for household expenses, mortgage, utilities, groceries, Lily's school tuition. When I actually sat down and went through it, I found 18 months of withdrawals I couldn't account for. Not huge amounts at first, 200 here, 300 there. Then it escalated. A transfer of $4,000 in November, $6,000 in February. A pattern of ATM withdrawals every week from a branch I'd never used, in a part of the city my husband had no reason to be in regularly. $42,000. Gone. I went through it 3 times because I couldn't believe the number. I didn't say anything that night. I made dinner. I helped Lily with her reading homework. I watched my husband watch TV and I thought about all the times he'd told me I was overthinking things, that I was too stressed, that I needed to relax about money. The next morning, while he was still asleep, I took photos of every statement going back 2 years. Then I called my best friend and drove to her house and sat at her kitchen table and cried for about 40 minutes while her dog put his head in my lap. She's the one who told me I needed a lawyer before I did anything else. I want to say that clearly because I have seen too many people in situations like mine do the confrontation first and the lawyer second, and it costs them everything. I did not do that. I called a family law attorney in Columbus, someone my friend had used when she went through her divorce 2 years prior, and I made an appointment for the following Tuesday. His name was Mr. Hendricks. He was in his mid-50s, wore reading glasses on a chain, and had the energy of someone who had heard every version of every story and was not shocked by any of it. I laid out everything, the finances, the living situation, my daughter's treatment, the years of slow diminishment. He listened and took notes, and when I was done, he said, "Okay, here's what we're going to do." What we were going to do was document everything quietly before my husband had any idea I was preparing to leave. I was not to confront him, not to move money, not to say anything that would put him on alert. I was to keep behaving normally while we built the case. I said I understood. I understood. I understood. And I did everything he said. Okay, I did almost everything he said. There were 2 moments where I deviated, and I need to explain both of them, because the comments I imagined people would leave. Why would you talk to him? Why didn't you listen to your lawyer? I want to address that directly. The first was my brother-in-law. About 3 weeks after I started working with Mr. Hendricks, my brother-in-law called me directly. Not my husband. Me. He said he'd heard through my husband that things were tense at home and he wanted to talk. I knew, sitting with the phone in my hand, that I should let it go to voicemail and tell my lawyer. But I also knew that my brother-in-law knew things. He'd been the recipient of that money. He was potentially a witness. And I had a feeling, not something I could prove yet, just a feeling, that he wasn't entirely comfortable with what had been happening. I met him for coffee. I recorded the conversation on my phone, which in Ohio is legal as long as one party consents, and I was the consenting party. I didn't accuse him of anything. I just asked questions. I let him talk. He talked for 45 minutes. He told me that my husband had given them money from savings and he'd assumed I knew. He said he'd asked once if I was aware and my husband had said yes. We'd discussed it. He said he'd believed him. He said his wife had pushed for more than he was comfortable with, but he hadn't wanted to cause conflict. He was not a villain. He was a man who had let himself be comfortable with a lie because the lie benefited him. I've known people like that my whole life. They're not evil, they're just weak in specific ways that end up costing other people. I sent the recording to Mr. Hendricks. He said it was useful. He also said, very calmly, "Please don't do that again without telling me first." I said I wouldn't. The second deviation was my husband. The week before I was scheduled to file, he asked to meet me. Not at home. He said he'd found an apartment, that he knew I'd found out about the money, that he wanted to talk before things got legal. He suggested the parking garage attached to his office building. It was a Wednesday afternoon. I know how that sounds. Parking garage, Wednesday, a man who'd been draining my bank account for 18 months. I know, my lawyer told me not to go. My best friend told me not to go. I went anyway. Here's why: I needed to hear him explain it in his own words. Not because I was going to forgive him or consider reconciliation. That door had been closed for months. I needed to hear him say it out loud so I could understand what story he'd been telling himself. Because the story a person tells themselves matters. It tells you who they actually are. He told me he'd done it because his brother needed him, and I had never really understood what family meant. He told me he was sorry I was hurt. He told me he hoped we could handle things civilly. He said he loved Lily and wanted to stay in her life. He said all of this in the parking garage of his office building on a Wednesday afternoon while I stood there with my hands in my coat pockets, and I thought, there it is. There is the whole marriage in one conversation. He never asked how she was doing that night I found her in the garage. He never mentioned that. He just said he loved her and hoped to stay in her life, like those were the same thing. I said, I'll have my lawyer contact yours. I had told my best friend where I was. I had texted her when I arrived and texted her when I left. I want to be clear about that. I took precautions, even if I shouldn't have gone at all. The filing happened on a Thursday. Mr. Hendricks had prepared a forensic accounting of the $42,000 in missing funds, which we were pursuing as dissipation of marital assets. In Ohio, if one spouse drains joint funds in anticipation of divorce or for non-marital purposes, the court can factor that into the division of assets significantly. We were also requesting full physical custody of Lily, with supervised visitation to be determined, given the documented pattern of neglect, including the night she was found alone in a cold garage. I had photos from that night. I hadn't planned to take them, but something made me pull out my phone before I carried her inside. The timestamp, the temperature reading I'd taken on my phone, the look on her face. I hate that I took those photos. I'm also glad I took those photos. The months that followed were not clean or simple. I want to be honest about that because these stories tend to wrap up too neatly and real life doesn't work that way. There were hearings and continuances and a temporary custody order and a period of 3 weeks where Lily and I were staying in the guest room of my best friend's house while we waited for the court to formalize the terms of who stayed in the house. My mother flew out from Phoenix. She slept on my best friend's couch. She made Lily oatmeal every morning and watched kids' shows with her on the tablet, and didn't ask me questions I couldn't answer yet. My mother and I have not always had an easy relationship. That month, I understood that we would be okay. Lily was 7 years old and she knew something big was happening. She didn't fully understand what. I explained it to her the way her pediatrician suggested, that sometimes grown-ups can't live together anymore, and that was never, ever her fault, and that I was always going to be there. She nodded very seriously. She said, "Is Bun going to live with us?" I said yes. Bun was absolutely coming with us. She said, okay. Kids are extraordinary. The financial case took longer than the custody case. My brother-in-law ultimately provided a statement corroborating that he had received transfers from my husband without knowledge of my awareness. The recorded conversation had laid the groundwork, but having it in writing, signed, mattered more. His wife was less cooperative, which I had expected. She had the most to lose socially if the full picture came out. What came out, eventually, was that over the course of our marriage, my husband had transferred a total of $42,000 to help his brother's family, had paid his sister-in-law's credit card bills twice, and had also, this part I didn't know until discovery, opened a credit card in the name of our household and charged an additional $11,000 to it, which I was technically also liable for until the court ruled on assignment of debt. $53,000. When Mr. Hendricks told me the full number, I was sitting in his office and I just looked at the wall behind him for a moment. $53,000. I had worked 6 years as a nurse practitioner. I had done overnight shifts and holiday shifts and come home some mornings so tired I sat in the car in the driveway for 10 minutes before I could make myself get out. $53,000. The court awarded me the marital home. My husband was ordered to repay the dissipated assets through a structured payment plan. His portion of the home equity was reduced accordingly. Full physical custody of Lily went to me, with my husband granted supervised visitation every other weekend for an initial 6-month period, contingent on his completing a parenting course. He completed the course. He shows up for his weekends mostly. I try not to have feelings about that in front of Lily. What I want to say about those months, about that whole year, is this: the hardest part was not the legal process. The legal process had steps and timelines and a lawyer who wore his reading glasses on a chain and knew exactly what to do. The hardest part was the internal accounting, the going back through all the small moments and seeing them differently. The pancake dinner I came home to, his brother at the head of my table, my husband laughing in a way he hadn't laughed with me in over a year, my daughter on the cold concrete floor with her rabbit. There were nights in my best friend's guest room when I would lie awake and wonder if I had missed something earlier, if there was a version of this where I'd caught it sooner. I don't think there was. I think I had trusted him. And trust is not a failure. Trust is what you're supposed to do when you marry someone. The failure was his. I have a good therapist now. She's helped me separate those two things. Lily started second grade in September, in the same school with the same friends. She made the honor roll her first semester. She lost 2 teeth and became briefly obsessed with the concept of the tooth fairy's logistics. Where did the tooth go? What did the tooth fairy need it for? Was there a factory? And she asked so many follow-up questions that I eventually had to make up a whole tooth collection system involving spreadsheets, which she accepted with complete seriousness. I got a small apartment about a mile from the hospital, 2 bedrooms. There's a coffee shop on the corner and a park at the end of the block, and Lily can see a creek from her bedroom window, and she has decided the creek is extremely important and needs to be checked on daily. I check it with her. Some evenings, when she's asleep and the apartment is quiet, I sit at the kitchen table with a cup of tea and I think about the woman who stood in her own doorway and heard her husband laughing with other people and didn't yet understand what she was walking into. She thought the worst part was behind her. She had no idea. But she walked inside anyway. She found her daughter. She picked her up. That's the whole story, really. Everything after that was just the work.